Hey guys, aka 88 on Cars. Today we're going to talk about building this thing. I'm going to take a real blast from the past, show you what the car was like in the stock form, the works that were done to it and what it looked like right when we finished, and then maybe slightly controversially give you 3 reasons why I wouldn't actually have one again. This should be fun, let's get into it. So just before we get started, it's worth saying that I was originally involved with this car 10 or 15 years ago, but I have tons of material, pictures, stories and shenanigans to tell you about. I think probably the first thing I should say is when I first met this car, it was via an old school friend of mine called Seb. At the time I was working for one of the businesses that was involved in building this car, hence the reason for having so much material stored on a hard drive. And we very much met this car in standard form. Beyond that, it wasn't just standard form, it was also crashed form. So the car had had some rear end damage. We never really knew what, but we suspected because of the level of damage, it was probably hit by something fairly high, so a large 4x4 or perhaps a lorry. This basically caused both of the rear quarters, the boot and the rear bumper to get completely annihilated and the car was written off. That being said, it was what was called the old school Cat D, I believe, which I think is new school Cat N, the one that doesn't involve structural damage. So actually the car started and drove sort of relatively well. So what Seb was really trying to do with this S2000 was he really wanted to make it an Amuse S2000 replica. So for those that don't know, Amuse is a Japanese tuning company and they're known for engine modifications as well as fairly outrageous body kit modifications. Now this car was built in the late 2000s, so we're out of the max power, all show no go phase of car culture, but we're definitely still in the big body kits, wide body kits are still sort of in fad. I'll let you decide whether you thought they were ever in fad or if in fact they are still in fad. But I thought this kit looked really cool. So after the kit arrived and it was put on the body shop shelf, the first job was repairing the damage to the back. Now, the way that it was decided that it should be done is the rear panel really needed to be replaced as there was no point in trying to salvage it in any respect. One of the rear quarters was only slightly dinged, one of the corners above the light was I think creased in, the other one, so the driver's side, was really quite buckled, and there was a bit of a toss up about whether the quarter should have been replaced or whether it could be repaired. The answer, folks, is it should have definitely been replaced, but actually that's not what was done here, so some creative filler work and fiberglass work will be coming as we go through this video. So after the rear quarters were slightly bent back into something that looked like a rear quarter, we started fitting parts of the bodywork on, so the rear bumper went on first. Now, one thing about the S2000 Amuse kit is, on the Amuse race car, the exhausts are not in the standard position, so standard, the exhausts come out sort of the dual exhaust that sit in a normal bumper position, whereas in the Muse system, the exhaust exits were almost right below the rear headlights. Not by a lot, it was only about sort of 15 centimeters, so really quite close. So the standard exhaust system came off, some standard lights were put back in as the original ones were smashed to pieces, as they were, and we went around looking for someone to install a custom exhaust system. So as we were waiting for that exhaust system to finish, the guys set about fitting the rest of the panels to the car. So the front wings were like for like replacement, if I recall, and I think the side skirts bolted on with relative ease as well. But then they went around doing the smaller pieces of work, and actually, you know, the guys that did the bodywork on the filler and fiberglass work that they did was pretty excellent. They also decided to mould in the rear quarters, so rather than having them riveted on, there was a smoother, flushed look that was applied to it, which I thought really made the car pop off. Now, for those of you that haven't fitted one of these large body kits before, the genuine kits normally come at a significant price tag, and they are probably the closest that you're going to get to fit. Genuinely speaking, when it's a fiberglass kit, it's never going to go just straight on the car without some modification, typically quite a lot of modification. I think I recall that this kit may have been a copy. I can't remember where the kit originally came from, but it was a relatively decent copy. If it was one, it was sort of double-lined fiberglass, so it wasn't the one where you sort of look behind and there was no gel coat that sat behind it, and it felt good quality. However, when they tried to line it up on the car, I recall that there were some pretty significant body gaps. So when we looked at the front of the car, when you had the replacement wings to the bumper and the standard bonnet, all of them, the panel gaps around the lights, between the fenders and the bonnet, were pretty atrocious. So long now started the fiddly work of trying to get these to line up, which basically is taking the panels on and off the car multiple times and making almost sort of millimetre improvements each time as you go. So whilst the body modifications were underway, the exhaust fabricator came round and made up an exhaust system. Now, we're going back to the times where quantity was probably over quality, but again, the task that was being asked was quite difficult. Now, the exhaust fitted into the bumpers quite nicely. There were some adjustments that we made to the hangers to make them fit a little bit nicer. Again, I think the body shop that was working on it spent a lot of time getting these panels to look right. Again, the sanders, the chalk lines, the trying to line the panels up was incredibly laborious. The other thing that was done is because the over fenders were so much wider and we wanted to run much wider wheels, the interior sort of the arch lining was cut and welded back. Again, another laborious job. We slats cut into the arches, welded back down to the chassis. Then there was some special undercoating that was putting over to make sure that it was a smooth surface, because if it wasn't and the wheel or the tyre would hit it, the last thing you wanted is to have some form of blowout. So at this stage, all this work had probably taken Seb and the other businesses that work on it about 6 months to get it to a state where a prime layer could be put on it. And I remember when I first came by and took some photos of the car in its prime state, it was great to see it finally taking shape. Seb also ordered some wheels that showed up. I think they were rotor grids, if I recall correctly, and they showed up in this lovely bronze colour. Seb wanted to do the car in the classic Amuse sort of finish, which was broadly white with black details to go with the kit that were put on it. So in these cases there were some black splitters, some black side skirts and a black rear diffuser. So after this last point there was probably another couple of months of sort of tweaking and tuning. So here you can see some pictures of the car in its sort of semi-finished state, and apart from riding as high enough to be a tractor, it would definitely look like a car and was complete. So it was at this point that I almost lost sight of the car. Seb took the car back and did a number of sort of other like little bits and pieces himself. Included, I think he put some carbon mirrors on the side and a large carbon wing on the back. That was very much in vogue at the time as well. And that was the last I saw of the car for a number of years. I then, in my own sort of time, went off and did my own thing. So one of the automotive businesses that were involved in this that I was working for at the time, it was a great thing to, if you're into cars, to actually be employed for a short period of time doing stuff within cars. I learned a lot then. But I then went off to university to pursue my original choice of career, and I lost the sight of the car. Now, at the time when I went to university, I was in my late 20s, so at the time I still had my Porsche Boxster S, which, if you don't know how I feel about that, watch my review of that car 12 years on, and why I thought it was such a fantastic machine. Seb at this point got hold of me again, and at the time he was working abroad and living abroad, and the car was not really doing anything. It was kind of sat, I think, at one of either at his house or his parents' house, and he asked me if I could help him sell it. So this is one of the situations in life when I look back and thought, did I manage to negotiate that? So I managed to negotiate a deal whereby I would help Seb fix up the car, which meant it needed to be sort of insured, MOT put back on it again, and the numerous parts fixed up and clean to sell it for a much better price. And it's a bit of a unique car. It's one of those things whereby, as we're selling any modified car, they're only worth as much as someone will pay for them. So after negotiating a price for one's services for doing such a thing, the car came back to me in somewhat of a state. The lovely bronze wheels had been sprayed a very unique colour of green, so very shouty. There was also a slight event when I think on a track day to Castle Combe, some wheel bolts might not have been done up properly, and one of the rear wheels, I think passenger side, may have come off. I wasn't there, and unfortunately don't have any photos of it, but I record this story. So there was some damage to the original kit that was put on the car. There was some other things, like the exhaust system was rattling. I think the engine management light was on. The car just needed a little bit of love. So at the time, I decided in my university house I was going to try and repair it. So this meant spraying the wheels with rattle cans at home, doing some work with some local actual sort of really good garages to fix the more complicated stuff like the exhaust system, because actually part of it had to be actually remade. It wasn't just a case of adjusting the hangers, and I did a whole bunch of other things. Now, having this car whilst I was in university was pretty fun. It was really enjoyable. I was in the university in the southeast of England, so it gave me some chance to sort of drive the car on some nice summer's days, which I really did enjoy. So a great sort of, it allowed me to sell my current stock of cars, including the Boxster, but not be completely immobile through that last time. It was a nice distraction when I was studying towards my finals. Now, let's get into the 3 reasons why I wouldn't own or buy an S2000 again. Now, some of these are going to be controversial, and as you've seen from the content within my channel, I am an enthusiastic amateur about cars at best, especially when it comes to anything technical. But sometimes it's useful to have an opinion, for better or worse, if nothing more, to generate ideas or generate conversation. So let's get into it. So reason number 1 is probably going to be the most controversial of the lot. The engine. I came from a Porsche Boxster S before that, and whilst those cars are known for not having a nicer gearbox as the S2000 and having much longer gear ratios, what that car did, because it had the 6-cylinder engine in, was just oodles more torque, and Porsche really worked that engine out, and it was magnificent in all RPMs. The S2000, specifically the F20, there was this dead spot between 3,500 RPM and when VTEC kicked in, which I think was about 5.5, getting on to 6,000 RPM, where, honest to God, nothing happened. It almost felt like the BHP graph, the torque graph, just literally got to one point and flatlined right the way across as well. This basically meant that you had to rag the nads off this thing at almost every stage to get the power out of it, and it was really easy, even with the relatively short throws on the gear ratios, to get caught out, and basically the car to caught in this dead spot, and you would basically get beaten by hot hatches of much smaller sort of CCs that may or may not have forced induction, and it almost put me off. Buying any other car that had a K20 or so derivative within it. Luckily, with after this, I did go ahead and buy the FN supercharged Civic, and I think one of the key things here is that supercharged or forced induction on these engines would have changed the car. So I don't think that I would have been saying this if the car was, fitted with one of those. Now, that leaves us with one further dilemma. If a car in its standard form is only good when you do stuff to it, it basically detracts from the car being great. I sort of feel the same way about the GT86s. What I would love is one of those cars with a Supra 2JZ engine out, a big whopping turbo and everything else. But to do that, you would almost be ripping apart the car as Toyota or Subaru had intended it. And I'm not sure if that makes it a good car. Make up your own mind. But for me, that would be one of the things that would stop me getting the S2000 again. So I think reason number 2 is probably a contra to this, right? So the car is rear-wheel drive, right? And if you're an experienced sort of car driver, and I certainly don't put myself as the most experienced, I'm certainly not a great driver, I'm probably an enthusiastic amateur at best. One of the things that I would find is when this car let go, for a mid-engine rear-wheel drive car, because of how the engine was tuned and where the power bands were, it was the most twitchy and hard to control of any car I've ever driven or owned of that format. And the reason being is let's say you were going into a corner and you were just going around something at speed, and let's say you were you're not absolutely going for it, so you're not right in the VTEC range, and you were just trying to use the mid-range. If the car steps out, putting your foot on the accelerator, because of how the car is designed, you would basically not have any power to cause any correction. So there were numerous times when I was driving in the wet, or I was driving on the dry, and I got a bit of slip, and it was pretty close to actually letting the back end going all the way around on you and you ending up in the hedge. If you're on full chat in the car, I think that's different. But again, it was just something that I felt unpalatable. And again, compared to the Boxer, which is a mid-engine rear-wheel drive car that should be more difficult to control when the back comes out, my experience of owning both cars at the same time as the S2000 was much more difficult to control. Again, if you're a better driver, you might not find this, but for the enthusiastic amateurs out there, that's something to bear in mind. Now, the third reason is a bit of a jokey reason, probably more in relation to this car. Whilst the car wasn't that low in terms of where the fenders were in the wheel well, because of the body kit and the slight extension that was granted to the profile of the S2000, this thing used to bottom out and scrape everywhere. I remember when I was taking someone that later was my girlfriend for a time out on the first date, I drove into a multi-storey car park and I was driving her home. And on the down ramp of it, the car basically bottomed out. I had to ask her to get out of the car so that I could drive. Now, she was really a very skinny girl as well, do you know what I mean? So talk about an icebreaker on your first date of, sorry, do you mind getting out of the car because you're weighing it down and I can't get over the speed bump. On the same journey home, I tried to take it over a speed bump, and the front bumper basically just hit the speed bump and just bottomed out. So that was point number one. The other thing was, let me tell you, big carbon fibre wings, guys, not always great. You drive that thing on a windy day down the motorway and you could just feel the rear end just sort of picking itself up every now and again, and if there was a side wind like you're driving over it, you really could feel it within the car. This should be no surprise to anyone that says like big modifications like this have some downsides, but it kind of added to the car's charm and drama, and actually sometimes getting in and out of things was half the fun. You sort of got a sixth sense for when you had to do the old going across things diagonally to get it over. I actually probably had more fun with that as well, so that's a bit of a lighter, jokier thing to finish on for this segment of the video. Guys, thanks for staying to watch to the end of the video. I hope you found this blast of the past a bit of an interesting sort of retrospective look. As we can see with this car, this one was definitely more quantity over quality, but it was still a fun experience to be involved with and also have it sort of in one's semi-ownership for the period that I was selling it. But then at the same time, maybe it allowed me to be a little bit more objective because I wasn't with it start to finish and it wasn't my baby or my car, to give an interesting perspective here. What did you think? If you liked the video and enjoyed the build, even if it was just for the jokes and the humorously questionable quality of build, give this video a like, or leave me a comment, good or bad. I'm here to get involved in any sort of car discussions. I do try to respond to all the comments, and if you enjoyed this content as well as the other content I have, please do think about giving me a subscribe. It really, really does help. Otherwise, guys, thanks for your time and catch you in the next one.